Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Mess. So, here, kind of fun and interesting update for you guys today. Just one that I wanted to follow back up on after talking about it like 3 years ago. I'm playing the beta of Resident Evil 1.5, basically what Resident Evil 2 would have been had Capcom actually released the first version. And interestingly enough, the last update of this was actually January of this year. Hasn't really been touched since, but since I've talked about this, like I said, maybe 2-3 years ago, a lot has happened. And honestly, the entire saga of Resident Evil 1.5, the groups that were hunting for all the different animosity between different modding groups is a wild story that I'm not going to completely get into, but just be aware it does exist. Before I get too far involved though, do me a huge favor down below, hit like and subscribe and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, I got a Patreon link down below as well. But honestly, Resident Evil is a long and storied franchise. There's a lot of different games that have had beta versions before we actually got the original release. Resident Evil 0 started life as a Nintendo 64 game, and there is footage out there, even though a beta's never leaked. And honestly, some of my favorites have got to be Resident Evil 4 with the Hookman version shown off, basically going full survival horror versus what we got in Resident Evil 4. And don't get me wrong, I love that game. I still think it's one of the best RE games ever made, but I would be curious to see what could have happened had Capcom kind of just went with more of the straight horror version. And that's kind of what Resident Evil 1.5 truly is. You get more zombies on screen at once, and you get a lot more gore. This game kind of went harder than we saw in Resident Evil 2. And I think one of my favorite things about RE 1.5, outside of the fact that you can actually sit down and play it, is how the Raccoon City Police Department is way more realistic of a setting than it was in RE2. Don't get me wrong, I think RE2 is actually one of the best PlayStation 1 games ever made, but it always felt like they were trying to shoehorn in the Spencer Mansion from the original RE into a police station and kind of give it that haunted house vibe. And even though the design and layout here probably isn't final and definitely can be a little bit confusing, it reads way more like an actual traditional police station that you would see in any major city. And there's just something about the overall tone of this game, even if it isn't finished, that really is a very intriguing experience. And honestly, with all of Capcom's remakes and remasters, I'd love to see them come back to RE 1.5 and maybe button it up for a modern audience. Imagine a universe in which you could actually play this game, but it was basically done in all of the modern RE engines. I think it would be a really fun treat because we know we have a Resident Evil game coming out, but obviously that isn't out as of the recording of this video, so something like that in the interim would be kind of fun just to play around with. And you will see here there is no door animation, it's just a black transition, and I left that one in there just so you'd better understand how it works. But Resident Evil's been getting so many remasters and so many new versions of classic games outside of Code Veronica because it seems like Capcom just kind of pretends that game doesn't exist, and I don't know why. Something like this, even today, has a lot of interest to it, and I would love to see it get finished up. Now, unfortunately, it seems like none of the modding groups that are actually working on RE 1.5 are continuing to do so, and if they are, I haven't heard anything about it whatsoever. But there's been enough cleaned up here that there is a campaign, there is a storyline, and for the most part, the game will work. And it really is just a fun historical time capsule to go through something that never actually existed, because a lot of what I do on the channel when I dump arcade games that no one's ever seen before, prototypes that never made it to market, it's fun to actually be able to share stuff out there that could have been but never actually happened, especially during the month of October where we do some horror gaming specials. I remember seeing previews for RE 1.5 in magazines back in the day and being really excited about it because, again, it took a way more realistic approach where even RE3 and beyond kind of have that fantasy universe vibe going on. You'll see there some things don't line up text-wise, but otherwise this is a crash-free experience and you can have a lot of fun with it, outside of the fact that you kind of just want to get past these loading doors. They just take forever, even in Duck Station, which I'm playing it in now. Leave me a comment down below and you tell me, did you ever play RE 1.5, and if so, when's the last time you checked it out? Because if you haven't taken a look at this year's updates, there is a lot here that is definitely worth going back into the game for if you have played it. And if you haven't, it definitely is worth checking out in October because it kind of just gets to take a peek behind the curtain to see what the evolution and development process of RE2 was. This game just has a lot of things going for it, and even though Capcom canceling because they didn't believe in it, I think this would have been as big of a success as the actual RE2 we got. But at soundtrack sample time, 45 seconds, and I'll be right back with a lot more history. I mean, the soundtrack there might not be anything special, but it does work in context for what's going on. But I love the sound effects here, all that wet crunching of bone and flesh that you're getting from the RCPD members. But be careful when I say this game has a lot more zombies, I mean it. You can back yourself into a corner quite literally here because Leon can't get past the collision on these zombies. For some reason, just get stuck, probably because it is a prototype. And the death animations here just straight up a little bit more horror than you got in RE2. But once you get to RE4, they definitely pushed even further at Capcom there. Now moving over to Elsa Walker's campaign, this is primarily what intrigues the most people, so I figured I'd hold it to a little bit later in the video, because Elder was supposed to be one of the two characters that would have been in RE2, but obviously that changed completely on the retail release. And while Capcom's made some nods to this game before in some of the costumes, really haven't seen much of this character's backstory whatsoever, and that's why I'd love to see a remaster of something like this, because I think there is a very interesting premise here, and if you modernize it, I think you could probably just call this like Resident Evil Gaiden, even though that game technically exists. Just make it a side story, make it an alt-universe sort of release. Fans really wouldn't care whatsoever why it existed, they'd just love to play it. Make it like a $40 download, and I would be there buying it day one. And like I said, as we go through the RCPD here, this is really what sticks with me when I play this prototype, just how realistic it looks. And that's something that I think the franchise could have benefited from, at least in the 90s. Because like I said, the RCPD we got in the actual RE2, beautiful location, but again, felt like a haunted mansion that just happened to be made into a police department. Can you imagine that town hall meeting where they're thinking, hey, remember that old haunted house we have at the outskirts of town? Fuck it, let's just make that our police station because it'll intimidate suspects. That's kind of the vibe I always got off RE2, where here in RE 1.5, it just feels like a real municipality building. And I know that's a weird thing to kind of maybe not fixate on, but talk about a lot, but it always just kind of felt like the developers at Capcom were thinking to themselves, how can we make this realistic horror? The zombies here just go harder, there's way more gore effects, they have way more hit points, but again, because this is not a finished game, it is a prototype that fans have been modding, it really is hard to say where the Capcom choices stop and where the fan modders choices start. A lot of the environments here are stuff that you have seen in different previews and would be part of the game, but of course it was never finished, so whatever has been added onto, you kind of have to think about that as an approximation of maybe what Capcom wanted, but it could be that they also guessed completely wrong and really didn't get any of that correct, because when you make assumptions, honestly, when you're trying to finish a game that never got finished, you kind of have to make leaps in logic. But if you get stuck here in a horde of zombies, you're totally screwed. We're going to move into soundtrack sample 2 time here, a little bit different music, a little more fun sound effects, and I'll be right back. I mean, I love that kind of ephemeral soundtrack there where you have those moans and groans in the background, almost like the boiler of a ship ready to burst. It builds tension without having to actually show any horror gore on screen, because if you heard that in real life, it would not be a place that you would want to spend any time in, and it is so effective here in 1.5. And that really is the reason I love looking at stuff like this, because I love thinking about the what-ifs of situations. Obviously, if you know my channel, you know I love collecting 3D M2 hardware in games, talking about consoles that never actually came out and games that were never actually finished. Because in some alt history timelines here, RE 1.5 did become RE2, and you basically got to play this game at retail, and that's always some things I think about. What could have been? Where would Resident Evil be if this was actually Resident Evil 2 and not the game that we got? Because honestly, the entire franchise could have been completely different had this one game actually come out versus being cancelled and remade from scratch. If you think about it, Resident Evil 5, while a fun game, totally campy, kind of leaning away from horror, and Resident Evil 6 was basically one action movie set piece in a row that really didn't hit that horror very hard either. It's only Resident Evil 7 and 8 where we finally got back to the horror genre, but of course it moved into the first person aspect as well. And while I really do like that about the franchise as a whole, I still like the third person kind of survival horror campaign that we get in some of the remakes. But it's one of those things, being able to play this is just a blast, and fast moving zombies definitely going to heighten up the tension. And I would have loved to have seen, even if Capcom hadn't finished this game, just putting it on a demo disc back in the day, a kind of what could have been sort of situation, because there's so many different development prototypes out there that I wish developers would share them a little bit more. Although I will say in some instances this game can be a little bit nonsensical. It's too dark to see anything in this room, so you can't pick up the tool that you need to use in a different area because we have to activate the light, but obviously that tool down there is 100% way too bright. You'd be able to see it completely. So there's some situations in which this game's unfinished status definitely comes out and you can see just how close it was and also how far away it was at the same time. But if you have some spare time this October, play some Resident Evil 1.5. I assure you it's completely different than the Resident Evil 2 we got, and it definitely is worth checking out. If you have played it, leave me a comment down below and tell me what you think. But short of that, we're done. I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.